All right, live from the Big Tomato. It's Toke. I'm here with Jeff, and we're actually in person. We're not doing the Apple transcribe option. We're using a more advanced method to record this, so I hope the quality is a little better. So Jeff, since we last podcasted, which was like a month ago now, and I think hopefully we'll try to get this out more regularly moving forward. I had a conversation with a source in the know with the Kings. And enough time has gone by, and we've seen the ESPN piece and the athletic piece and all that. And a lot of the information that I think I shared has with you has kind of been verified by journalists. But so I'd like to just give a rundown for our audience of what I can share. But before we do that, just so people don't think I'm blowing smoke up their butt, the source that I talked to, I did disclose to you.
Right.
Would you say this source would be someone who would know what's going on?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, this is someone who very easily, anyone who knows Vivek would know who this person is.
Yeah, it's like when you see on ESPN, they're like sources closely connected to the team.
Yeah.
That's what this person is.
Yeah. So, all right. Jeff doesn't know this person, but I do through a vast array of Jesuit connections and whatnot. So I told this individual that, and I've known this individual for my whole life, largely, and I've never talked Kings with them because I've never wanted to be the person who's trying to get information out of them or anything. But I just couldn't help myself with the Fox trade. I said, and I told this individual, I said, the Kings are a loser organization with a loser mentality. And this is the problem. And this was kind of an attack on them in a way, but also someone needed to say it, and I couldn't help myself. I just want to give the fans a little bit of background as to what was actually disclosed to me. So, number one, Mike Brown, I'd like to retract some of my comments about him. It does appear to me that Mike Brown was a problem with the team. It's very much the mentality within the upper echelons of the team that Mike Brown's responsible for ruining Kevin Huerter, and he's responsible for Keegan Murray not developing and even regressing in his time in Sacramento. And I disclosed with you what he did to Kevin Huerter, and we'll kind of leave it at that. But
right.
It would be something that I would think is not very professional. And, we'll leave it at that. De'Aaron Fox, on that front, what was shared to me is, I'll just be pretty blunt about it, is his wife kind of runs the show. She's from San Antonio. I don't know if a lot of people know that.
Right.
So when we get to the point where he's asking for a trade, even though he claims he never did, there's only one team. It's because his wife wanted to go home. And also, this individual shared with me that De'Aaron Fox chose to wear his wife's college number now that he's with the Spurs.
Yep.
And his wife was actually the one who who got him to fire his initial agent, who was his high school basketball coach, and hire Rich Paul. So, do you have any commentary on any of that before we go with the other stuff that's shared?
Well, I want to go back to the Kevin Huerter thing, because I don't think there's anything that we can't share. There's nothing, too crazy in there going on.
Okay.
So are you okay if we kind of share what was shared with you?
Sure.
So my understanding is that basically Mike Brown called out Kevin Huerter in a film session, and essentially the entire film session was just ragging on Kevin Huerter.
Uh-huh.
That's basically what happened, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot else to it.
That's the story. Obviously, Kevin Huerter is not a good defender.
Right.
I think we all know that, and I think we know that Mike Brown kind of has this reputation as being this defensive coach and whatever, which that's a whole other, like, why did they hire him if the front office has a different philosophy? But anyway, obviously Kevin Huerter is not a good defender at the NBA level.
Right.
he's not like unplayably bad, but he's not a good defender.
Right.
Is it like, what exactly as a coach do you have to gain by?
I think it's high risk, high reward, right? I mean,
Yeah,
because some players are going to respond to that. And
right.
I think some players in the locker room probably really liked that. I mean, again, De'Aaron Fox apparently loved Mike Brown, if you want to believe that.
Yeah.
And said he's never going to play for another coach. And that was after, my understanding is that was after the Huerter situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was still a big supporter. And when the best player in the locker room is supportive of those kind of things, you know, I think obviously the idea is that it pushes Kevin Huerter to be better. Clearly it crushed him and he didn't respond the way that he was supposed to. But also is that the reason he was missing wide open threes? Is that the reason he's still missing wide open threes, even in Chicago? Like it's not like he's had a bounce back in Chicago.
No, he hasn't.
Right,
he definitely hasn't.
It's not like the guy's over there like, oh man, I just need to change the scenery and I'm doing a lot better now.
Look,
he's clearly having a hard time, and so maybe that's a guy you want to get off the team. If he's not going to respond in situations like that, then maybe that is a guy you want to get off the team because you want people to be like, that would piss me off, right? I think that would piss you off if someone called me out in front of everybody. I like to think I wouldn't wilt like Kevin Huerter did,
right.
But that's clearly what happened.
Yeah, but there's a professionalism concern there. And just to kind of advance the ball forward a little bit with what was shared, the way that they look at it is like Kevin Huerter could have been a player that you signed based on his first year in Sacramento. You traded for him, and he's making like 16.5, 17 million, but his production using their metrics as a first year player for the team averaging whatever, like 18 points or 17 points or whatever it was he was like a $25 million player
right
that first year. So that's a win on the salary cap. So you take a player like that and you roll him up with a couple draft picks or a couple second rounders or maybe a first rounder, and you upgrade and you get a star. And that's kind of the way that Monty's philosophy works around acquiring talent is you take something, you buy low, you pump that asset up, and you sell it at a higher price. And this is kind of what they did with Harrison Barnes. They took him, they wrapped him up with a pick swap,
right?
And they got DeMar DeRozan, which is an upgrade, supposedly. And I would probably even argue
I would definitely say it's an upgrade.
So you missed that opportunity, and actually what you had happen with Kevin Huerter was he was a depreciating asset, and that's being pinned on Mike Brown. So that's kind of the first part that I wanted to talk about. Now I wanted to talk about kind of the mentality of the front office and the ownership group around the Fox trade and what I had to say about that, which was largely what I said in our first podcast together.
Right.
You guys are losers. You don't like. To me, it would have been better to get less for Fox than you even got because you basically got nothing, and he got everything, and the Spurs got everything. So it's just like you're creating a moral hazard by allowing players to dictate things like that. Because then when the next guy does it, which I'm hearing rumblings about Sabonis maybe wanting to meet with the team and figure out, what the long-term plan is.
Okay.
Like, you've now created that moral hazard where a player can kind of get everything they want and you get nothing for that player. Like, we're getting a lot of praise now for picking up Jake LaRavia and for picking up Jonas Valanciunas for second-round picks or whatever. It's like you could have had Jonas Valanciunas for De'Aaron Fox. If really we're calling this such a great pickup,
right? That
you were able to take, a lower half of the NBA starting center and like some end of the rotation guy off the bench. Like, you really don't think you could have gotten that for Fox from another team who just wanted to rent him for a year? Right. Now, the source I talked to would say, no, you couldn't. But I just straight up don't believe that. I think that eventually, because they still had like 5 days left before the trade deadline, there could have been a team that just said, you know what, screw it, the last 24 hours. Like, let's go for broke, let's go for it. Or you could just sit on it, tell him to go get his hand surgery or whatever, and trade him in the summer. Like, there's a lot of options here. So what I try to impress on this individual was, do the Lakers or the Miami Heat or any of these like franchises that are winners sit there and look at a player and say, we got to get something for them or so we don't lose them for nothing. That's like a loser's way of thinking. And the response that I got back was, we're the ugly stepchild of the NBA. And you can't really compare us with the Lakers. And it's like, okay, well, if that's your mentality, how are you going to compete with the Lakers then?
Right. I mean, I think he's right. We are the ugly stepchild of the NBA.
Okay, but do the Spurs feel like they're the ugly stepchild of the NBA?
No, but they got the history to back it up.
They got the history to back it up, but because they don't have the mentality, it's a chicken and egg.
Yeah,
thing,
I understand.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, look, I think a lot of Kings fans talk badly and negatively about Sacramento and how no one wants to be here. But the reality is, Sacramento is in the same basket as like 20 other teams.
Right.
And a lot of those 20 other teams are very successful. Look at Cleveland right now. I don't think Cleveland's more desirable than Sacramento. I don't think San Antonio is more desirable than Sacramento. Yet somehow those franchises figure out a way to win. Like I said in the last podcast, the Pacers are always good.
Well, like you said, I think it is a chicken or the egg thing because, again, like Cleveland won a championship, 5 years ago or whatever that was? It's like that's going to have a ripple effect throughout the organization, even though LeBron's gone, even though like that he's no longer there and it's a totally different team. It's still going to have a ripple effect. Same thing with San Antonio, like that's having a ripple effect through the organization. But it all starts with having the front office that knows what they're doing. Right. And so San Antonio has a front office that knows what they're doing. Even Cleveland has a front office that knows what they're doing. You know, they're not passing on good players. They actually built the team to win a championship. So, you know, the Kings, we're going to have this mentality until we can prove that we know what we're doing. Right. Aside from De'Aaron Fox, who it's not like we like found De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox fell in our lap at the number 5 pick. Right. Have we made any picks in the last 10 years that it's like, wow, we really found this guy?
Halliburton.
Okay, and then we traded him for Sabonis,
which was fine. It's whatever. But
I mean, I would argue that we should have kept Halliburton, but still,
if you knew that the thing with Fox was going to play out the way it played, sure.
But again, they didn't want Fox. Like that tells us a lot, and so I think that also brings us to the point of the fact that like I think we overvalue De'Aaron Fox in Sacramento.
So let's that there's a lot of truth to that. I agree, but I think that you have to also be honest with kind of the thought process here. From the vantage point of the Pacers, Halliburton was 3 years younger in his NBA career. So that's 3 years more that he's removed from that supermax. So that buys you 3 more years. And so I think De'Aaron Fox was already on his first extension, whereas Halliburton was still on a rookie scale. And that matters when you're dealing with these trades. Obviously, the younger a player is, because I mean, I'll tell you straight up, player for player, I don't think Halliburton's better than Fox. He's probably a better passer. He probably makes his teammates better than Fox does. But as a straight up player, I don't know that he's a better player.
Mentally, he's better also, which I think plays a huge role.
We have now found that out.
No, we've always known that. We've always known that. I should say we've always known that Fox was a mentally weak individual.
Yeah, we have. Okay,
and so
I'll give you that.
And Halliburton, again, even when he was here, this is why people were so pissed when we traded him, because he's like, I want to be here and I want to win and I want to make this a contending team. Did we ever hear De'Aaron Fox say that? I mean, he may have said that. He may have said that like kind of like under his breath or in passing or something. But like Halliburton was active in the media talking about that. Like, we're here to turn this thing around. And so that's why people were pissed when we traded him.
So going back to my source, I think the thing that I wanted to impress on him, on this person, was that the mentality of being afraid of losing Fox for nothing is the reason why it's a loser's mentality, and it's the reason why they will never win as long as they have their current situation. In principle, because you let Fox dictate where he went, and he didn't have to give anything up. The Spurs didn't give anything up, and that is a conference rival, to be clear. That probably was already on their way, and you just accelerated their timeline. So if you're gonna
I'm not so sure about that, but
well,
yeah.
I think the fact that you couldn't get them to part with any of their assets
Right.
is really an indictment. And I want to just briefly mention this, and I didn't get into this level of detail with this person because it was a 10-minute conversation. It's weird to me the way the NBA is structured, because we have all these collective bargaining agreements that are putting different pieces in place to try to incentivize teams to be able to hold on to their players. But in order to do that, the teams have to be willing to go to the mat, and they never are. And this is a problem. So those things might as well not be there. To give you an example, if you have a player's Larry Bird rights, you can give them a max contract with 8% raises every year. If that player signs with another team without his bird rights, they can only get 5% extensions every year. And they can only get 4 years, whereas with their team that has the bird rights, they can get 5 years. But you'll never see a player, ever, at any point in time, just sign with another team without there being a sign-in trade involved. Like always, even when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, for example, that was a sign-in trade technically.
Right.
Like, we'll throw you a second rounder just so we can get his bird rights and whatever. Well, the teams at some point have to say that second round pick is not worth it for me. If you want to go to San Antonio or you want to go to whatever franchise, you're losing that 3%.
Right. Take the hit.
Take the hit.
Yeah.
And by never being willing to do that because you're afraid of losing, like, that provision might as well just not even be there. So this is fundamentally, I think, a problem that a lot of franchises have. I wanted to shift gears now into a little bit of the recent news. Fox played his first game in Sacramento as a visitor almost a week ago now.
Yep.
And in full Rich Paul fashion, we got a lot of pieces dropped that same day. One from The Athletic and one from ESPN. And I think the ESPN piece was more interesting from my perspective because it had a lot more quotes from Fox.
Right.
And obviously the one that jumps out, I'll just kind of throw it to you before I give my take, was him saying that it was leaked that I gave the Kings a list of teams, and that's effing BS because there was no list. There was only one team. Right. And a lot of people feel like I handcuffed the team by doing that, but it's not my job to build your team.
Right.
Take it away, Jeff.
I mean, listen, man, I've gone back and forth on this Fox deal so much. And if I'm putting myself in Fox's position, I totally agree with him. Right? If I'm Fox, I'm like, listen, I'm going to try to do everything I can to get to the team that I want to get to also. But the fact that he's coming out on Twitter and in the media and trying to play the victim and trying to play it like, I'm a good guy, I've always loved Sacramento, and I will basically, like,
I never asked for a trade, even though I gave him the team.
Like, I wouldn't do anything to hurt Sacramento. It's like, you absolutely did. You absolutely did do that. You knew exactly what you were doing, which is what that quote proves, right? It's not my job to help build the team. It's like that quote proves it. And so, you can't have it both ways. You
can't, no. And I think that there's a big incongruency here. And I was listening to Carmichael Dave talk about this when the article dropped. And Carmichael Dave said, I agree with him 100%. And, Carmichael Dave is kind of emblematic of a lot of this loser think because, whatever.
He's been in it too long.
Something like that. But it's like, look, last podcast, we said something about how the Kings were not acting in good faith with it. You said the Kings were not acting in good faith. And I said, well, there's not a lot of good faith on any side of this, right?
Right.
And kind of in rereading the article and thinking about that more, I do have to push back a little bit. The Kings informed his agent that they were fielding requests for a trade for him. And this kind of set off a chain of events that led to him getting traded. I would think that the Kings informing his agent that this is the direction they're going was a sign of good faith.
I don't disagree.
So for him so the way I like to put it,
which was by the way a huge mistake.
Oh, that right there is a fireable offense.
Right, huge mistake.
Like, and this is where my source, when I kind of talked to him about it, would say, I just don't understand the way things work. Like, not that I'm Steve Jobs, obviously, right? But do you think Steve Jobs sat in the boardroom and thought, like, how are things usually done? No, like, the innovators, the people think about, they don't care about like holdover things like that. Well, we need to inform the agent of, I don't know that was the way Jeff Petrie operated.
Right. I think agents played a lot different role when Jeff Petrie was around. So like,
sure,
like I would say, I think the only argument to be made is that Rich Paul is a super influential agent and a super involved agent, and he could potentially have the power to screw you over. Okay. And so if he takes it as disrespect, like, you're playing the politics of it. I'm not saying that we should have gone to his agent, because we definitely should not have, but that's the only side of the argument I could possibly see as being like, all right, we got to keep this guy happy.
Rich Paul is LeBron's agent. LeBron has never come into Sacramento, and who else does he have that I really care about?
I mean, he has a lot of folks, dude.
I know he has a lot.
He has a lot of people.
Well, he has Darren Fox. He has Zach LaVine, which is just a whole nother thing.
Right. But,
right. Like, I think that what bothers me is, if you're at a point in your life where you are one of the 30 NBA owners, like, you are that successful,
right?
You can't let someone like Rich Paul push you around, and you can't be intimidated by someone like Rich Paul.
I mean, I don't disagree.
I do not care how influential he is as an agent. If you look at who these NBA owners are, these are people,
these are billionaires
who have probably a direct line to senators,
right?
The president,
right?
Whoever.
Yep.
Like, you shouldn't be afraid about pissing off Rich Paul.
Right.
You should say, hey, look, buddy, like, we're going to be gentlemen about it. We're going to do you a professional courtesy when available. But push come to shove, we're going to do what's in the best interest of our franchise. If that means taking offers from him, we're going to do it. And we don't need to tell you when we do or don't get an offer that we're considering.
Right.
So the way I like to say it is, with this situation, you handed De'Aaron Fox the knife that he then stabbed you in the back with.
100%.
So everyone who was involved with that needs to be fired, whether it's Vivek's daughter, her boyfriend, which we've now found out is in a wild turn of events. Like,
right. Yep. It's actually possible.
They actually have input.
Right.
Which, wow.
Yep.
That's amazing. Crazy. And okay, I get it. Fox wants to leave when he's dealing with that.
Right.
But we're stuck with the team. Like, that's the thing that I want to impress upon fans. Is like, there's a lot of talk over the last decade about player empowerment. But as a fan, when you're a fan of a team, you're kind of in the same bed with the owners. So you should be siding with the owners and not the players. But most people don't want to do that because they grow emotional attachments to the players.
Yeah, and again, I think, I want to walk back something that I said last podcast also, because when De'Aaron Fox told the Kings, like, hey, I'm not going to play for another coach, at that time when we did that first podcast, I was like, well, you fired the coach, of course he's going to leave. But now that I've had time to process all that, it's like, what's Mike Brown to do? Coach here for the next 15 years? Like, it's unrealistic. And so
De'Aaron Fox hasn't earned that.
Whether or not he's earned it, it's just that's his way of saying, I want to leave anyways. And again, it's unrealistic for De'Aaron Fox to say that and request that. But our front office has to be smart enough to realize, like, okay, this is him asking out, essentially. Because he knows that Mike Brown's not going to be here for the next 15 years. So he's not going to be here for the rest of De'Aaron Fox's career. Most likely. That's just, if you look at it throughout the NBA, that's not how it works most of the time. Yeah. And so, inevitably, when we get rid of Mike Brown, De'Aaron Fox is going to be like, all right, this is what I said was going to do, and so now I'm out. It's like, all right, we don't need people on our team like that are going to make those kind of demands, because it's not realistic. Like, if it's in our best interest to fire the coach, I'm not saying it was or it wasn't, but if it is in the best interest of our team to fire the coach, then just like you're saying, we got to be willing to do that without being scared of a player or an agent or whatever.
Hey, you know what? If he really rocked with Mike Brown on that level, maybe he should take some accountability, because if you remember, the whole thing leading up to Mike Brown being fired was culminated with a play in which De'Aaron Fox
on the 3-point play
fouled a 3-point shooter, gave up a 4-point play. Yeah. We lost the game to Detroit, and then after the game, he said, "What difference does it make?
Right,
it won't make a difference."
Yep.
Kind of the
Hillary Clinton does.
Okay. Yeah. What difference does it make? That's for some of our younger audience, they might not get that reference. That was our former Secretary of State under oath in front of Congress.
That's right.
But yeah, so if De'Aaron Fox really rocked with Mike Brown on that level, as the franchise player and as a team captain, he should have said, I messed up. I'm going to own it. And
Right.
he didn't do that. He didn't play. De'Aaron, so you also mentioned last podcast something about how he told Damian Barling, he told Carmichael Dave that he didn't talk to the media for 3 weeks last year because the team didn't make him available, and the team is who decides that.
Right.
Here's the issue that I have with that, kind of in retrospect, and I probably should have said it at the time. If you look at De'Aaron Fox last year, he had a phenomenal November and a phenomenal December, and then his performance took a major dip in January, which coincided with this.
Correct.
So something else was going on, and I think a lot of us were holding out hope that November, December De'Aaron Fox was who he was.
Right.
But the reality is, the January onward has been who Fox has been for most of his time in Sacramento.
Correct.
And really, those first 2 months in the previous season were the outliers.
Right.
Right? So that's a little recalibration that I think, as fans, we should have done by this December. And that's when the team should have also done that same recalibration and said, okay, Fox isn't who we thought he was, because if he was, we wouldn't be the 10th seed right now. We wouldn't have just lost 5 straight games. Yep. He wouldn't have given up a 4-point play and not taken accountability for it.
Right.
You're going to fire Mike Brown? Okay. Have a trade lined up for De'Aaron Fox before you pull the trigger on that, and do both of those things at the same time. By firing Mike Brown, you set in motion a scenario in which you destroyed any leverage you had.
Right, and that's exactly what I said last podcast. I was like, we should have had those things, and they should have been executed simultaneously.
It should have been like the special operation with the Somali pirates.
That's right, everyone shoots at the same time.
The snipers all go at the same time, right?
Yep.
So, anyway, look, going back to Loser Think again real quick. Video montage for De'Aaron Fox.
Weak.
Like,
I mean, again, like, I think that the NBA, I feel like that must be something the NBA requires or something.
Well, let's take a step backwards. If you remember when Kobe Bryant died, me and George talked about this. They did a video montage of like 5 minutes of Kobe like just dunking on the Kings.
Right.
And it's like, could you imagine the Lakers? Like, just to go back, and like, again, we hate the Lakers. The Lakers are horrible. Like,
yep.
If I could, well, I'll not finish that sentence, but you know, I don't rock.
We're all Kings fans, all right?
We're all
we
Kings
get it.
fans. The Lakers would never do a video montage for some rando guy who hit like game-winning shots against them. That's just not what they would do. Like, if anything, they would do a tribute where maybe they show a couple highlights of him doing something to their team, but also some highlights of their team doing something to him or something like that.
Right.
Doing, like, a month later, doing this video tribute to Fox, who just basically railroaded your team into getting nothing for him except for Zach LaVine, who's a bad contract.
But hold on, doesn't your source think that, like, internally the organization thinks they did a great job, right?
Yeah.
So of course they're going to do a video montage because they're like, wow, we did a great job trading this guy. We improved our team. We're looking good for the future. So like, from their perspective, they're like, why wouldn't we do a video montage? Obviously from the fans' perspective, we're like, what are we doing? Like, we don't need to do this right now. But from their perspective, they're like, oh, it all worked out great.
So just for everyone to know, the way that the higher ups on the team, and again, you know, it's not uniform because there's, as we've learned, many different inputs here, but some of the inputs anyway have this attitude that Doug Christie is the coach moving forward. Mm-hmm. They looked at the first hold on. Should have put it on airplane mode, but we're still recording. Okay. They're doing analysis that 28 games is a third of the season, and really you need a third of the season to project forward.
Evaluate.
So they look at Doug Christie's first 28 games. At this point, there was like 20 games. They said once we get to 28 games, we'll show that that's about a 53-game season. Like, if you were to annualize that, or whatever the term would be for a season, and that would put you at like the 6th seed or the 5th or whatever. You'd be clearly a playoff team. So based on that and based on those metrics, like the problem was Mike Brown, and they just had to remove Mike Brown, and everything else is great. You know, the team was in shambles when Monty took over. Now the team's in a great position. Now we're having winning seasons. We have a winning record.
Right.
This is the mentality of the team. And then picking up Jake LaRavia was like a good like arbitrage move that like the market didn't factor in, but like he found this diamond in the rough in Jake LaRavia, or he was able to take, because you know Monty cannot hold on to 2nd-round picks. He took 3 of the 5 that he got from the Spurs,
right,
and turned them into Jonas and Jake LaRavia. And the other 2 aren't going to convert until Charlotte.
But are we even going to be able to keep Jake LaRavia? I think we can offer him. His contract's up at the end of this year, right?
Here's my answer. Who cares? You could get another Jake LaRavia tomorrow.
But that's my entire point, is like, we're talking about like, oh, we found a diamond in the rough, blah, blah, blah. It's like, bro, he's going to be gone next year. I think we can only offer him like $5 million.
He's not going to get more than $5 million.
Let's say he gets $8 million.
Okay, let him go. That's fine.
You got to let him go. And it's like, okay, that was cool. Like, what was the point? So we could be the 10 seed or the 8 seed? It's like,
you got to take some shots. And look, Jake LaRavia on this team, that's a nice little pickup. Like, let's be clear.
Sure.
Like,
he's playing his role, but let's not pretend like Jake LaRavia is a stud.
He's not a starter. Like, he's not even close. There's never going to be a situation. I mean, look, he could prove me wrong. Who knows? I've seen stranger things over my years, but that dude's probably never going to be a starter. He's going to be like your 9th guy. Right.
Exactly.
Maybe like if he really stretches, he's like a 7th man.
Right.
Like if he like really
like I'll give him props for JV. Like he's a good pickup and he fits our team really well, and especially with Sabonis out, like he has slid in beautifully.
Again, though, this is like getting the extra credit question right after you missed all the like essay questions that were like 50% of your grade.
Right.
All you had to do to get Jonas was 2 2nd-round picks and take his contract on.
Right.
Okay, so let's break this down. You sent Toronto 2 2nd-round picks to take Sasha's contract off your hands that he then walked away from.
Right.
Could you maybe and then you took back the Williams kid. I don't remember his first name. Started with a J.
Okay.
Had him play 1 preseason game, decided this guy's no good, and then sent him to San Antonio and gave up another 2nd-round pick to unload his contract. So you burned 3 2nd-round picks just to get rid of Sasha's contract.
Putting stuff in the garbage.
So you could have just kept Sasha's contract.
Right.
Waited for him to walk away from it, and then use those picks to get Jonas. And then when you trade De'Aaron Fox, let's say you do the exact same trade, now you have a bunch more 2nd-round picks.
Right.
Instead of Jake LaRavia, maybe you get a better player.
Right, yep.
So I'm not going to give him credit for that. And, you know, Jonas, I think he's a heck of a player. I think that he'd start on probably at least 10 teams in the league.
Mm-hmm.
But let's also not blow this out of proportion. Like, this now makes us the 6th seed because we got Jonas.
Right.
This just gives you a little cushion now that Sabonis is hurt, where you can weather that storm. That's all it does, really, because he's not playing with Sabonis a lot, and when Sabonis is already playing 35 minutes,
right?
Like,
but it keeps you in position. It keeps you in the standings. It keeps you in the hunt. Whereas without Sabonis and without JV,
you're screwed.
You got big problems.
So
I will say this: I think that post trade, the Kings are equally as good, if not better, than pre-trade.
Yeah, this is where we disagree. I think when they lost, so they've now lost 2 straight games and 3 out of their last 4.
Yep.
I think that there was a lot of fool's gold going on right after the All-Star break because we were playing the worst teams in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
And that got us to build up a little bit of a winning record. And I will say this is progress in a certain respect because the DeMarcus Cousins teams would chronically underachieve and lose to teams like that.
Right.
So the fact that even with Monk and Sabonis out, we're still beating these bad teams, that does signify some cultural advancement as far as like, okay, we're not that bad anymore. Fair.
And we're playing with teams that we're going to have to play in the playoffs or the play-in. Like that Clippers game that just happened 2 games ago, It's like we played with those guys. We had 2 of our best players out, right? Monk and Sabonis were out. So it's like we're staying competitive. They were at full strength. So
they had Norman Powell out, and I mean, is that really Kawhi? I mean, that was Kawhi's first game.
Well, okay, still.
So, I mean, but look.
I mean, he managed to hit the game winner.
Yeah, but the Kings, in my opinion, lost their identity when they traded Fox.
I don't disagree with that.
They went from being a fast-paced team that had the fastest player in the NBA to now, like, what is their identity? They hustle for Doug Christie. I'll give them that. But
now we're just a mid-range jumper team.
Now they're just
that's all we do.
Now they're just,
we do ISO mid-range jumpers.
You don't have a point guard. The Monk experiment at point guard, in my opinion, has failed largely. I mean, the turnovers is a big problem.
Yep.
You don't have a backup. Markelle Fultz is,
he's not serviceable.
I could see a scenario where he's serviceable, but right now it ain't it. So,
right.
I don't know, man.
So you think we're worse?
I think we're clearly worse, and I think that's going to play out in the next few weeks. And if I'm wrong, and I'll admit it, and I'll have plenty of opportunity to admit that. But I think you beat a lot of bad teams. And even against those teams, you didn't look great. With I think the Charlotte game being the exception, where they won by like 40.
Yeah.
But
I saw that one.
Aside from that, you were going down to the wire with. I mean, you lost to the Pelicans with no Zion right before the All-Star game.
In fairness, it was the second night of a back-to-back
against them.
Understood. But it is hard in the NBA. It's hard to win 2 games in a row against the same team.
Well, that team beat you 6 times last year, so
they were a different team. But yeah, I agree.
That's another point too. Toronto traded for Brandon Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
They gave up nothing. They got Brandon Ingram, and they basically just gave him a $40 million a year extension, which is cheaper than Zach LaVine. I think you probably could have gotten Brandon Ingram for De'Aaron Fox. I'd rather have Brandon Ingram on this team than Zach LaVine.
Yeah, that's probably true. Do you think that the Pelicans would have traded him to Sacramento, given that we're both in the Western Conference? And I think they're more.
Well, we traded Fox to the Western Conference, so who cares?
Don't get me wrong, we would do it. I'm not saying they would do it. Of course, the Kings would do it. But I think it's hard to. Of course, I'm saying this again as the Kings did it, but it's hard to trade one of your best players to a Western Conference rival that you're going to have to play, however many times a year, and you're going to have to watch them,
I think
maybe have success.
I think them buying one more year, because Fox has that extra year over Ingram, they might have looked at it and said, okay, let's do that, and he's a better player than Ingram. More or less. I don't think Ingram's made an All-Star team, has he?
I think he has. I want to say he has.
Yeah, so maybe they're looking at it as a...
And I'm not sure Fox fits over there with McCollum and all that.
Oh, no, he doesn't. That wouldn't be a fix for them. It would just be like, let's trade this at, maybe we're buying this stock at 16 and we could sell it for 18 in this summer or something like that.
Right.
And for us, it's like, well, we have a chance to re-sign Ingram maybe. Like, I'd give him $40 million over giving Zach LaVine $49 million, which is what Zach LaVine's going to make in 2 years.
Right.
Like, that's an easy one for me. And it's a position in need. The Kings need a forward. They need a long, athletic forward.
Absolutely.
So it's like that was a move that they missed out on.
Right. I will say this. I don't think, let's assume Wemby comes back full steam next year.
Yeah.
I don't think they're a top 4 seed next year.
Okay. I'd probably agree. I think that, ironically, it might not really be up to Fox or Wemby. It might be up to the other players they have.
That's what I mean, is that they have Fox and Wemby, and that's great, but that's not a team. Who's their third best player? Castle?
Probably Vassell at this point.
Oh, because I was going to say, I've seen a lot of Castle highlights.
Well, Castle dunks on people, but he still comes off the bench.
But he's still throwing up big numbers, isn't he? I want to say he threw up a 40-piece the other day.
Okay, well...
Either way, my point is that it's like Wemby and Fox don't make a 3 seed. They're not a well-rounded team.
No, they're not.
Not to mention the coaching.
And they don't even have a coach right now.
Right.
So who knows?
So I don't think that they are significantly better than the Kings next year either.
Well, we just saw them play the Kings, so we saw.
Well, I'm not talking about, again, I'm talking about with Wemby.
Okay.
I don't think they're leaps and bounds better than the Kings. I don't think it's like, oh, like these guys have just totally leapfrogged us, which they would need to do because they were worse than us going into this.
Look, I'm not going to sit here and count San Antonio's money, whatever. As far as I'm concerned, I don't really care for that franchise. They voted for Seattle and against Sacramento back when that was a thing. So, I wish them nothing but the worst.
Correct.
And I hope that we just continue to be better than them. I don't know how sustainable that is, but yeah, I don't hate Fox, but I'm also not going to give him a tribute video. And I also don't think he's earned having his jersey retired or anything. I mean, you make the playoffs one time. You have two
we can't retire his jersey, for God's sakes.
He does have a lot of records here, though.
That's great, man. He's had a long time to get them.
Yeah.
And what does he have to show for it? We don't need individual records in Sacramento.
I mean, if you're not going to retire Cousins' jersey, I don't think you can retire Fox's jersey.
Yeah.
At least, okay, Fox made the playoffs. Cousins didn't.
We made the playoffs one time and had a first-round exit. Like, what's our standards here, for God's sakes?
Well, that's the problem. The Kings don't have standards.
Correct.
And they're comparing themselves to themselves from like 5 years earlier.
Just a quick aside, I was watching a game the other night, and they started playing highlights from the early 2000s teams. And I'm like, this is what we do now. Like, we don't have any highlights to play from our current teams or even the teams of the last 5 years. So we just play highlights from the early 2000s. I was like actually laughing with my wife. I'm like, look what's on the TV right now. Like, there's a game going on that they could be showing highlights from, but they're showing highlights from 2003.
Yeah, and I think that we have to be a little bit more honest with that early 2000s team. Like, it felt great. We loved them.
Yeah.
They made one conference finals.
Yeah.
Right? Like, really, it's not like they had a series of conference finals. They had like 3 years where they made it to the second round and 1 year where they made it to the conference finals.
Right.
And then, Weber blew his knee out. And the way that the salary cap and the team was constructed, like, that was a death nail. And then when he came back, that really screwed things up even more. But they were never, they had a 2-year championship window with that team, and they didn't get it done.
Yep, true.
Right? And then, strangely, as soon as they started taking that team apart and trying to reload, the Maloofs started having financial problems, and we started making just one boneheaded trade after another for financial purposes. And it really tarnished Jeff Petrie's legacy, to be honest, because I do think that he demonstrated over his first 10 years as the GM, or I guess he was vice president of basketball, whatever his title was, the executive, that he was a good executive. But then I think there's this narrative that Kings fans, especially like a lot of the Sacktown royalty people, have that he was passed by the analytics people, and he lost his touch. I think that Petrie really was hamstrung with the financial issues more than anything else. It's really not that hard to be good when you want to spend money. Unless you're the Kings.
Right.
But even the Kings, they've never paid luxury tax.
Right.
So let me ask you, man, because we're kind of getting towards the end here. Argentina Kings fan, someone who kind of has some good tweets here and there about the Kings, has said that the Kings have never fully committed to a tank, and this is something we should embrace. You kind of alluded to this last podcast, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to give me your thoughts on that, because I have some pretty strong opinions on this myself. Yeah.
So I think that we're too late to tank this year.
Okay.
We already have too many wins. There's going to be, I want to say, I was listening to the morning show today, and they were saying there's 5 other teams with way more losses. There's some teams that already have over 50 losses.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're in play necessarily for the top pick. And so I don't think it's viable this season. Again, it goes back to us not having a plan. You can't choose to tank at this point when you're above 500.
Okay.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't think that is how we're going to end up winning long term, because we can't draft.
So this is something else that my source told me, is that Monty's opinion is actually that we should tank, and he knew that the team had a ceiling with Fox and Sabonis. and Vivek has given him a win now directive. So just for our listeners to know that that's like actually what's going on, and it kind of makes sense.
When did Monty feel this way? Do you think he felt this way all along?
Yeah.
So when he took the job, he was like, "We got to tank."
Oh no! Like I would say in the last year or two.
Okay, so
this is why Monty. We've been waiting for him to make that trade to bring in like a Cam Johnson or someone like that, and why he's been hesitant to do it is because he's like, okay, great, like that doesn't get us to a championship, so why should I?
I mean, on the one hand, I don't disagree with him. On the one hand, I'm like, we're not on a championship trajectory.
Okay.
Unless, I don't know if you disagree with that, but I do not think we're on a championship trajectory. But I also don't trust our front office to do it. I think it's kind of convenient for Monty to say that because it's almost like job security for Monty. If you're supposed to suck, then it doesn't matter if you suck. And so, if because if there's a win now directive and he's the 10th seed, he's doing a terrible job, right?
Right.
If there's a tank directive, then you're allowed to suck for as long as you want. Because that's committing to a full tank is a 7 to 10 year timeline. Because you got to do that for multiple years. You can't tank 1 year and get a great player and then go be good. You got to do that for 3 or 4 years.
Argentina,
and then you got to develop those guys for 3 or 4 years. And then maybe you have a 3 or 4 year run.
So Argentina Kings fan, I think, gave 3 examples. Orlando, Oklahoma, and I forget the third team. And Oklahoma was able to do it in like 3 years. He said Orlando did it in 3 years. They got good for 2 years, realized they weren't good enough, and then went back to the tank, and now they're starting to build again. They got Paolo Banchero and
they're
whatever.
They're going to go back to the tank soon.
They're probably going to go back to the tank soon. So I'm anti-tank, and here's why. I think if you look at the teams that win championships, very few of them have ever gone full tank. Now, you could say, okay, well, the Lakers, they just have like someone who decides they want to play there, and so they never have a reason to tank. And actually, just to argue against my point, that's not totally true. They did tank for a few years. They got Brandon Ingram, they got Lonzo Ball, and then they turned those guys into Anthony Davis.
Were they tanking or did they just suck?
I think they were tanking at least part of the time, but Magic didn't do a good job there, obviously, as the GM.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But they did acquire some young, talented players over that course of time, and they were able, because they're the Lakers, to turn that into Anthony Davis.
Right.
Which, when LeBron just decided he wanted to play there, and then you are able to trade a couple young guys for Anthony Davis, now all of a sudden you have like a 2-year window where you're a contender, and then you suck after that because Anthony Davis is Anthony Davis, and he's never going to play more than 60 games in a season or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? But I think if you look at the teams who've won championships, like you look at Milwaukee, you look at Denver, you look at Toronto. I'm trying to take the teams out that are not like these dynastic, whatever, like the Lakers or the Celtics. Mm-hmm. Like these teams very rarely are tanking. In the case of both Dallas and Toronto, those 2 one-off championships in 2011 and 2019, mm-hmm. which I would argue were like 2 of the best championships anyone's ever won, because they just like kind of went on a March Madness run. They got hot at the right time.
Yep.
Those teams were kind of somewhere in the middle for a long time, and they just made a few moves that season that pushed them over the edge as far as like talent, and they got hot at the right time. So with Toronto, they traded Valanciunas and they got Marc Gasol. They traded DeMar DeRozan and they got Kawhi Leonard for a year rental. Mm-hmm. So Toronto never tanked. They just kind of were good for several years, and then they just found the right combination of coaching and trades to get them over the edge, and they got that one championship.
But especially thinking of Toronto, you got to have a front office with balls to do that.
Yeah.
They did Kawhi Leonard on a 1-year rental.
Who they knew was probably leaving.
And they won a championship, and he still didn't stay. But all the people in Toronto were like...
They don't care.
They don't care. They loved it. They were thrilled because they won a championship.
Right.
But if they didn't win, they'd be pissed. Mm. And so you got to be willing to take that risk is what I'm trying to say.
You got to have balls, and you have to want to win. And this is where the loser mentality comes in. Is like you're afraid that you're going to trade for Kawhi, and then you're not going to win a championship, and you're going to blow your franchise up. But
I think what the Kings, I think what Monty wants to avoid is a good thing to avoid, which is the Jazz. The Jazz of the last 10 years have made the first round a bunch of times and lost, and then that's it.
But the Jazz, going back to our last podcast, the Jazz did the same thing, and then they made the finals twice after just being in the playoffs for a decade.
Understood.
So it's like...
But now the Jazz are back in tank mode. And so if tank mode is inevitable, let's just get it over with.
Look, I think here's my take. You look at the top 5 guys in the NBA right now. 3 of them were not even lottery players, right?
Okay.
We got Yanni, we got Jokic, we got Luka, we got
SGA,
and then we got I'm going to say Ant-Man.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. Ant-Man, I think, was like a number 2 or number 3 pick. What was SGA?
I don't know. I was going to say like 13, but I could be totally wrong.
I think he was like somewhere in the 8, 9, 10 range.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an answer on the internet. I don't care that much. Right? But let's say those are your top 5 players in the NBA. So 3 of them were not even lottery picks. So, and in the case of 2 of them, both Yanni and Jokic, the Kings had the opportunity to draft both of those guys. Right? Every team had the opportunity to draft Jokic.
Yep.
Right? He was a second-round pick. So, obviously, if you have the number 1 pick in a year where Wembanyama's coming out, or a year Cooper Flagg's coming out, or one of these years, or Tim Duncan, or other examples, those are no-brainers. But my bigger point is you need to have an organization that you're integrating these young guys into. And if your organization is actively not trying to win and actively trying to lose, you damage the development of those players. And I think that's a lot of what happened to Fox, to be honest with you. I think a lot of that's his personality, but I think
it was a bad mix.
I think some of it was that losing was just okay for too long here in Sacramento.
I agree.
And I
think that's what I'm saying with Monty is, if losing is okay, then you're doing great.
Right.
And it's really hard to turn that around, both from a player's perspective and from a front office perspective, because it's like the expectation shifts from you being like, hey, losing is what we need to do, to being like, now we need to start winning. And there's always going to be that middle ground where like you're not quite winning yet, where you all of a sudden get bad at your job again. Right.
So here's my philosophy. I think you always just try to be as good as you can be. Try to make trades that make your team better. And you're balancing that constantly with like the future. And there's like, you've got to assess. But like Jerry Reynolds says, there are no 5-year plans in the NBA. Right. If you have a 5-year plan, you're probably not going to be there for the 5th year as a GM.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to just try to have that team be as good as they can be. And then when there's a dope player on the board, you got to take them. And that's what it is. Now, in the Kings' current predicament, they have a pick going to Atlanta this year that's top 12 protected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if tactically you're right there, like to me, if you gave me the choice of being the 10 seed and being the play-in or keeping our pick, let's try to keep our pick, is how I would look at it.
Agreed.
Okay? But I think this philosophy of, like, Philadelphia, the process, like, let's just tank, that's been a total disaster for Philadelphia. They got Ben Simmons and they got Joel Embiid out of that, and like they've never made the conference finals as far as I'm aware. So like, that's not the way either. Like you look at teams that are always good. It's easier to become great if you're always good than it is when you're always bad. Like so, Mike Brown would always say, it's easy to go from being bad to good, but it's hard to go from being good to great. I agree. You know what's even harder though? Going from bad to great.
Right.
So I think that if you have a team that's in the playoffs like 8 out of 10 years,
mm-hmm.
and you can catch lightning in a bottle, you make a couple moves that take you from being like a 6 seed to like a 4 or a 3 seed,
mm-hmm.
and then you catch fire and you make it to the NBA Finals, that's the approach that you should take. You shouldn't be taking this approach like, I'm going to build this juggernaut like the Warriors, where we're going to win 4 championships in 6 years, because the odds are, with the way the current NBA is structured and the salary cap, like you're not going to be able to keep all that talent. The reason the Warriors were because of this arbitrage situation where the salary cap jumped in one season. There was no like smoothing of that curve, and they all of a sudden had the opportunity to sign a max player in Kevin Durant.
Right.
While Steph Curry was making $11 million a year. He was underpaid. Like, that's a freak occurrence. That's not going to happen.
I mean, they were already sick before that, but yeah.
They were. But if they didn't get Kevin Durant, who knows? They just lost the NBA Finals to the Cavs.
Sure.
The rest of the NBA might have caught up with them a little bit. But when you put Kevin Durant on that team, they're just a matchup problem. Like, you're never going to match up with them. So, like, don't have the mentality that you're shooting for that. Have the mentality that you're trying to build a good team that wins. Maybe you tactically take an L, but that's it. And there's always going to be dope players on the board. If you look at all the seasons that the Kings were not tanking, like, this is the argument that some people make. They've never committed to a tank. I saw Carmichael Dave make this. There's some sort of narrative out there that the Kings have been tanking. The Kings have never tanked. They've always been trying to be good, and they're just bad at being good.
Right.
Okay, sure, fair point. But even when they weren't tanking, let's go through the list of players they could have drafted. They could have drafted Steph.
Right.
They could have drafted Clay. They could have drafted Kawhi.
And
they could
again,
have
that's the
drafted
point, right?
Lillard.
You can't rely on the front office, even in a full tank. You can't rely on the front office to make the right moves anyways.
100%.
So what's the point?
So the point is, I don't think things are going to change as long as Vivek owns the team.
I don't disagree with that either. Welcome to Basketball Hell.
Welcome to West Sacramento. Baseball Athletics. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
On the Athletics, man, I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be fun for them to be around. It'll add a little buzz, but I don't think there's anything. I mean, the owner. Speaking of bad owners, potentially the worst owner in all of sports. I don't even remember the guy's name.
Fisher.
Yeah, there it is. John Fisher, I think it is.
Something like that.
And so, I think it'll be fun to have them around. I think there's going to be buzz. I think that they're going to, speaking of lightning in a bottle, they're going to catch some lightning in a bottle this next 3 or 4 years.
They actually started spending money.
Because again, you got Kings fans. We're used to losing. We don't mind. We don't mind if the A's come here and lose. It doesn't matter to us. We're just happy to have a big city team in a small city like Sacramento. So it'll be cool. Again, you're gonna have like the Yankees coming to town. You're gonna have the Red Sox coming to town. Like that's cool.
Okay.
But I don't think they're gonna stick around.
Will you put an A's hat on?
No.
Oh.
Will you?
I'm all in.
Are you?
I'm all in.
Were you an A's guy before? Kind of whatever.
Look, I always said if Sacramento got a team, that would be my team.
I mean, if they had I should say this, if they become a Sacramento team legit, I'll be an A's fan.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
But I'm not
that's not the current plan. There's maybe like a 15-20% chance that happens.
Well, maybe if they get some cool like Sacramento A's swag, like I'll get it for the Sacramento aspect of it.
Okay.
But I don't care about the A's. And I don't think anyone should care about the A's. Let me make that clear, because they will only ever hurt you, much like the Kings. And so if you have an option to join something like this, you don't join it. You don't join it. Bro, we didn't have an option, okay? With the Kings, we didn't have an option.
It's a hereditary
disease.
I
can see this thing coming down the road from the Bay Area, and I'm like, I know what this looks like. I want nothing to do with it. I've been hurt before, and I'm not willing to be hurt again.
Oh, man. All right, man. Well, I think we've been going for about an hour. You got anything else you wanted to let the listeners in on?
No, man. I think we'll try to do this a little more often, and we can wrap it up.
All right, man. Go Kings.
Go Kings.